The problem with Kemi Badenoch is identified really well today, that she is not a serious politician. And why would I say this? Because she's positioning herself in the Conservative Party this morning in a way to appeal to those people who are tempted by reform, who may have voted reform and still retain their Conservative Party membership. Or at least that's the bit she's intending to go for. And it's generated a few modest headlines about whether or not her views align more closely with those of the Conservative Party or those of Reform UK. And her appeal today to Reform voters, calling them our people, suggests an ideological overlap, especially on issues like immigration and national identity. But it's about a tease. This is irresponsible behaviour by somebody who wants to be the leader of a party, to say, actually, a lot of people in our party are already voting for another party. Her reluctance to embrace Nigel Farage highlights a tension between Conservative leadership aspirations, which she still thinks she's got, and the disruptive populist forces in British politics, which she thinks she can manipulate. This is appalling behaviour, and it's a sort of advert for somebody who is behaving. Like the political equivalent of a cheap streetwalker, knocking on people's car windows and seeing whether or not they're going to roll down and have a good time, sir or madam. It's titillation. It's political titillation, and it's inappropriate. Utterly inappropriate. And the answer is, if you think that Reform UK is our people, then go and join Reform UK. Get out of the Conservative Party and clear the air. Now, what will that do to the Conservative Party? If Kemi Badenoch, Suella Braverman, Priti Patel go to their natural home in Reform UK and, bow down to Nigel Farage, because he's not going to let them be leader. Believe me, that's his party. Then, yes, it was going to reduce Conservative ranks to the extent that the Lib Dems may well become the largest party in opposition. They may become the official opposition within the term of this present Parliament. I think that's a small price to pay for restoring the clarity and the focus of a centrist right party, like the Conservative Party has always claimed to be. If it wishes to, I don't believe the Conservative Party wishes to embrace the far right. So it needs to rid itself of the far right. And now is the opportunity. Call it for what it is. And at the moment, Kemi Badenoch still thinks that a position of power is within her grasp. And I suspect she'll continue to cling on to the Conservative identity, teasing us all with that hint, oh, I may go, oh, I may. Well, the moment she goes, the moment her leadership claim is destroyed, she'll be popping off to Reform UK, looking for another chance to grab some sort of political identity and political power. Well, I wish her all the very best. She already has that identity. It's simply a matter of people recognizing it. It's a matter of her recognizing it. She has that identity. And she should clear off and recognize that she is basically a Reform UK fifth columnist, hiding in plain sight in the Conservative Party. And she and her friends have dragged the Conservative Party into a position where it can no longer be a position, a party of governance. And more than that, it can no longer be a party of reasonable opposition. It is a party that is fractured and unable to appeal to its original base. It either needs to make a decision, become Reform UK, or accommodate itself to the call of people like Sir John Major and return to its roots. It needs to be a one nation Conservative Party, and if the price of that is a Lib Dem opposition, so be it. So be it. The Conservative Party will cease to exist if it continues going down this rabble-rousing route proposed by Kemi Badenoch. Reform UK, led by figures like Farage, shares much of the rhetoric with the right wing of the Conservative Party, particularly around national sovereignty, opposition to mass immigration. However, Farage's party operates more of an anti-establishment force and more of a single ruler empire, which I think Badenoch and Braverman would appreciate, except, of course, I don't think they would acknowledge that Farage would be the only controller. Even if at the moment they remain apparently neutral. This is all about who you want in your tent. Do you want people in the tent looking outwards, or destroying the tent looking inwards? I think the time has come to open the tent up. If the Conservative Party is to continue beyond the present election, it needs to recognise the bad apples, and it needs to redefine itself. If it's going to wait until the next election, it will fragment and destroy itself completely. So let these individuals go off to Farage to find the home there, and at least to play around for a few years if that's what they want to do. If Badenoch were to move to Reform UK, it would catalyse a right-wing shift in British politics, but it might also save the Conservative Party, and therefore ultimately the concept of an opposition and the concept of possibly a future government. It might fracture the Conservative Party, weaken it at a time of electoral vulnerability, but it's better to do that now. It's better to lance the boil than to leave it to closer to the general election, even if there's to be a Conservative opposition. It may well be that her defection will trigger the collapse of the the reduction of the Conservative Party to the extent that the Lib Dems will take control of His Majesty's loyal opposition. That's perfectly in order. I think the idea of Reform UK becoming the opposition party is pie in the sky. And more than that, I think the British people will reject Reform UK. And I'm absolutely certain that people who align with the views of the Conservative Party would get behind a revived Conservative Party. And Badenoch's stance on key issues like immigration and the critique of leftist identity policies that resonate with voters disillusioned with the Conservative Party will help to reignite and build up reform. And maybe it can embrace what currently it's claiming are conservative values. No one has defined what those conservative values are, just as no one has defined the Brexit benefits, which seem ever more elusive. It's not something that you go back and you think, oh, these are Conservative Party policies. They aren't. This immigration thing is new. And the core Conservative Party policies are about preserving the past and about trying to inch forward to the future with the principles of integrity, integrity, and bringing people into the fold, not pushing them out. These conservative values which are being pitched by people like Braverman, Badenoch, Patel, Cleverly, these are invented values that align more closely to those of Nigel Farage. And the intention to reform the party from within suggests she sees herself as part of the establishment, not as a political outsider. She's wrong. The dynamic between Badenoch, Braverman and Reform UK could create an internal ideological struggle for the Tories, of course, and a departure of such figures may indeed spur a shift back to centralist or centrist policies that have characterised the party in its own one-nation tradition. That's what I would hope, certainly. And this would likely reinvigorate factions advocating for a more inclusive, economically liberal and socially progressive platform reminiscent of figures like David Cameron, Kenneth Clarke, Sir John Major. What Cameron was doing messing around with the rump end of the Conservative Party, I don't really know. And trying to give the impression that he approves of Brexit and approves of the immigration stance. Badenoch's defection could trigger the collapse of the Conservative Party, the collapse of the opposition in the middle of Parliament, but it could also trigger the revival of the Conservative Party. It's a risk that needs to be taken. The Liberal Party, the Lib Dems, are already big enough to take over the opposition, should it come to that. And depending on the size of the defection to Reform UK, that is a reasonable and realistic possibility. I think it's a risk that needs to be taken in the interest of honesty and preserving the nature of our political integrity. And that's taking a more holistic view, and it's essential for a government to have a good and working opposition if it's going to function. An opposition that is more obsessed with its own introspection, as indeed during the time, most recently during the time of Jeremy Corbyn's tenure, is not a good opposition. And everything points to this Conservative opposition being even worse than the Jeremy Corbyn period. It doesn't matter how charismatic or how inspired a leader of the Conservative Party might be. The current party is not being led by anything other than self-interest and self-obsession. It is divided, it is unfocused, and it is effectively useless. And will continue to be so if it continues to allow the breeding of all manner of chaos in its own party, then it helps to breed all manner of chaos in the government as well. And if the Conservatives can't get their act together, they either need to align with the Reform Party or give way to the Lib Dems. They either need to go or they need to be reconstituted. I think there's a possibility that in that reconstitution they must cede power to the Lib Dems and they must allow Reform to grow in its own way. I don't think the Conservatives and the Lib Dems joining together will be any possible force for government in the future. It's simply not credible. We are not that nation. And we should do everything to resist it. And the tease which is being put out by Kemi Badenoch is bad news. And I think it's genuine. As I say, it's probably spurred on by self-interest, but it's a self-interest that is cheap and tawdry and beneath contempt, frankly. It's dishonest. We need an honest debate that is prepared to split the Conservative Party and is prepared to accept the Conservative Party will become the third party rather than the party of opposition. And the Conservative Party, meanwhile, need to return to the centre ground. the brand identity cannot be compromised any further. There's already a brand that Suella Braverman tried to knock, and now Kemi Badenoch is jumping on that bandwagon. Priti Patel is on that bandwagon. That bandwagon, people need to recognize. It's not about circling the community. It's not about painting your wagon. Well, it is about painting your wagon. It's about recognizing your brand. That brand belongs in Reform UK. And from that point of view, Kemi Badenoch is right. Reform UK are our people. She is our people. She isn't part of the Conservative crowd. She's part of Reform. She needs to go off to where she belongs. And the sooner the better, frankly.